Welcome to all of our guests. My name is Dr. Fazio, and we are very happy to have you here. And I am honored to present our next speaker, Freidel Kushman, who will be speaking about yoga therapy and homelessness. And as many of you may know, we work with, this internship is working at the Venice Family Clinic, where we have many patients who are homeless. And in all the years that we've been there, Freidel brought her experience, and in her blending of her Dharmic path, has some wonderful recommendations for the clinic that we're really excited to hear what else you have to share with us, because everything that you brought to us at that clinic was extremely valuable, and I know is going to enhance the experience of all the patients who come there. So thank you, and with no further ado.
Hi everyone. So it's possible a few more people will trickle in. If they do, I'll say hi to them as they come in. To start, let's begin with a grounding meditation, which everyone's invited to participate in. No one has to though. You can tune out if you prefer. So sit comfortably in the chair. You can have your eyes open. If you want them open, just choose a focal point somewhere in front of you to gaze your focus. If you're comfortable with your eyes closed, you can close your eyes. Become aware that you're breathing. No need to change or alter the breath. So on every inhale, the abdomen is expanding outward. The diaphragm expands and the lungs fill with oxygen. And then on every exhale, the abdomen is moving in towards the spine. The diaphragm's relaxing and the lungs are emptying. So for the next 30 seconds or so, let's practice a full diaphragmatic breath. And now we'll begin to lengthen the exhale. So we're going to continue inhaling into the belly and the diaphragm, expanding on every inhale. And then focus on smoothing and softening and elongating the exhalation. "30 seconds here. And let's come together on 3 deep, full belly breaths. So great big inhale. Exhale. Great big inhale. Exhale. And last one. Great big inhale. And exhale. And wiggle your fingers and your toes and wiggle your brain. And open your eyes. I feel much better now that y'all have calmed down. So I'm so filled with gratitude for every person that has come today, that took time out of your schedule. Some people don't know me very well and you still came. I really, really appreciate that. And there's so much specialty and knowledge in this room from so many different backgrounds. So my hope today is that this really broad-based presentation can kind of bridge everyone's knowledge base into one foundational set point. This is also my first time using PowerPoint. How exciting. I need to express so much gratitude to my mentors, to Lori and Terry and Kathleen that this year and Amy's in the house, that have taken me through this year of growth and internal transformation the last 4 years. And I want to acknowledge that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, all the giants in this room, and many giants outside of this room. I also want to do a land acknowledgement. So when we talk about homelessness and the experience of homelessness and how to remedy this, it's essential that we recognize we are all immigrants here on Heech or Gabrieleño, or what's commonly now referred to as Tongva land. So let's all take a moment to recognize the land, the people, and the ancestors present here. Thank you. Next, disclaimers. So each slide could be a whole textbook. We're going to move through quickly. The focus of this presentation really narrows into the African American experience of systemic racism. And it's not because the African American lineage per se has any worse karma or trauma than any other lineage. However, disproportionately across systems, African Americans are manifesting worse outcomes than any other race. So we're focused on social epidemiology today, and we're looking at the height of the epidemic. The trauma of racism and identity-based discrimination is not easy for anyone to confront within themselves or within a group. So I am committed to entering this space with a brave heart, an open mind, and humility. Everyone say aye.
Aye.
All right. Last disclaimer, I too suffer from my own limitations in awareness and consciousness, and I am just as imprinted with racist, homophobic, classist, sexist shit. So please accept my apologies ahead of time for any way that I mess up. I prioritize my own growth and learning through that process of failing forward, or as my very good friend says, effing up. Up instead of forward. So now for the fun part. In yoga, we work with a mantra, which is the vibration of sound current. So we have 2 mantras that we'll be working with throughout this presentation. There's going to be a lot of terrible and disgusting and immoral and unethical conditions that we'll look at during this presentation. And anytime I identify something that's wrong, I'm going to practice the mantra, that ain't right. When you hear me say, that ain't right, I want you to call back and repeat it. So I'm going to say, that ain't right, you're going to call back and respond. That ain't right.
That ain't right.
Very good. The second mantra is every time we come across a solution and something that we can do to implement change now, I'm going to say, yes, we can. And I want you to call and respond. So, yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Sweet. Great. Okay. Table of contents. So, yoga, therapy, and homelessness. So looking at the history of homelessness, in the United States, historically and systemically, amelioration of social epidemics across the board, whether homelessness or incarceration or child welfare, etc. There's been a single-pointed focus on material and external components of service provision in the form of resource allocation, like whether that's permanent supportive housing or rehousing, finance, and policy. Los Angeles County, and there's some local leaders present in the room that are on the cutting edge of this. My boyfriend's here. Los Angeles County's been on the cutting edge, leading the nation in cultivation of best practices for homeless service provision. The city and the county, the local government, have sponsored some major community-generated reports and recommendations for best practices in the form of the Los Angeles County Trauma and Resiliency Systems Change Initiative, LASA's report and recommendations on Black people experiencing homelessness. Scotty's here! You can see anywhere that's open. And also LASA's report and recommendations of women experiencing homelessness. That includes best practices for gender identity and transgender service provisions. So best practices teach the basics of safe human connection in the face of complex unresolved trauma and chronic post-traumatic stress. Why are best practices so impactful? Best practices are physiologically rooted in the internal learning process. So we're learning about ourselves, and we're learning about our own mind, and increasing our capacity to adjust to the environment without compromising homeostasis. We're also learning to meet environmental needs. So that's where we come into service provision. We cannot meet the environmental need if we're unable to meet our own need. Best practices are manifest from the internal transformation of individuals that enliven the system. This is our introduction to yoga therapy and systems change. I hope that explained the table of contents. All right, so that was Elijah. So before I talk about social epidemiology, I'm really excited that Scotty's here. Scotty was one of the 3 people that were interviewed for this presentation. Scotty is a formerly person of experience in homelessness, current spark plug.
Still homeless.
Still homeless, technically, thank you,
Yeah.
by definition, in Los Angeles. And he's making connections that we will all see in the coming years. Social epidemiology is the branch of epidemiology that focuses on social structural factors on states of health. So it assumes that the societal distribution of advantages and disadvantages of health and disease are based on socioeconomics. Social epidemiology manifests across many systems, and all of these systems are contributing to the structural production of homelessness. So those systems include immigration, healthcare, criminal justice, juvenile justice, foster care, housing, education, labor, and socially manufactured poverty. Homelessness is like the final stop in every pipeline. And then homelessness is also a revolving door with each of these systems. Because of time constraints, we're going to skip the definition. I was also told to remove this slide. Ben Carson and Oris. We're going to skip the definition of homelessness just because of time, and we might come back to it later. The definition is so bureaucratic and heartless and confusing. It was the last thing I was writing outside trying to understand the definition of homelessness, and I still couldn't get it. Homelessness is a medical code, ICD-10 medical code, and it's Z59, problems related to housing and economic circumstances. So when we talk about yoga therapy for homelessness, I want to draw a comparison to yoga therapy for any biological pathology, whether it's diabetes or asthma. So there's a great story from this yoga lineage where a student asked Krishnamacharya, or was it Deskachar? It was Krishnamacharya. Student asked Krishnamacharya, this patient has come in with asthma. How do we treat asthma? And Deskachar said, who is asthma? So that's because in yoga therapy, we're not treating the disease pathology, we're treating the human as a whole being and a whole system. So in that same way, if a patient is coming in with homelessness, who is homelessness? We're not treating the social pathology or the cultural systemic pathology of homelessness. We're treating the system. And that system is all of those systems that we just went over: immigration, juvenile justice, all these systems. So the homelessness count nationally in 2018 was just around 553,000 humans. In LA County, 2018, it was 57,373 humans. In LA County, that's 1 out of every 250 people is homeless. I mean, we all know 250 people. There's people that we know that we don't even know are homeless. It's unclear if these numbers take into account undocumented humans, refugees, people couch surfing, and the people that you and I know in our very lives that are facing housing insecurity, instability. This is an inflating, rising epidemic. So poor outcomes across systems, all of the systems, are disproportionately manifesting by race. Nationally, 13% of the US population is African American. 40% of the homeless population is African American. That ain't right.
That ain't right.
Los Angeles County, 9% of the population is African American. 36% of the homeless population is African American. That ain't right.
That ain't right.
So let's understand prejudice versus racism. Anyone want to take a guess at what's your understanding of prejudice? Wait, I'll say it nicer. wait, let me back down. So, what's prejudice?
Have a preconception about something or someone, so like some ideas.
Yeah, preconceived idea about something or someone.
I second that. That's what I was going to say. You conceived it.
I third that too. So it's the forming of another. It's saying I am this way and they are that way. We are separate. It's the action of forming opinions and beliefs about the group of people and stripping them of individuality and forming assumptions about their culture, their practices, without really understanding these things. In prejudice, though, there's no power dynamic involved. Racism, on the other hand, racism is social and institutional power plus race prejudice. Racism is a system of advantage based on race, and racism is a system of oppression based on race. Racism is a white supremacist system. So there's 3 dimensions of racism. There's the internalized dimension, and that's the acceptance of the negative messaging within an individual experiencing the effects of racism. There's personally mediated racism, and that looks like suspicion in shops, or lack of respect, or being completely ignored, or dehumanization and scapegoating, and this is personally mediated. And then there's structural or systemic racism. And that implies differential access to goods, services, and opportunities of society by race. It's structural, having been codified in our institutions with laws and customs and practices, and there's no one identifiable perpetrator or perpetuator of systemic racism. Structural systemic racism, it manifests in both material conditions and also in access to power. So with regard to material conditions, examples would include differential access to quality education, housing, all the basic human needs. With regard to power, it's like differential access to information, even information about one's own history, resources, voice, and capital. So regarding systemic and structural racism, the biased constructs materially that manifest from this illness and consciousness, this is called the social determinants of health. So this is a chart that depicts social determinants of health inequity, and this is kind of like what produces the social determinants of health. Any cats in the room? So one, there's socioeconomic and political forces, this row. So we see governance, policy, culture, and societal values. And those impact people differentially based on these 2 rows, based on social hierarchy, which consists of class, power, prestige, and discrimination, and then socioeconomic position. Socioeconomic position dictates your access and opportunity in income, occupation, education. And then there's this stuff here, social class and gender and ethnicity. So this is a beautiful chart I made. I said, this is a beautiful chart. Yes, social determinants of health. Okay, so a conceptualization of the social determinants of health renders an upstream perspective of how lifestyle conditions generate illness or wellness. These conditions here determine conditions that shape choices and conflicts that each of us experience in our everyday life. And also this determines our access to opportunities and outcomes, life outcomes. So down here, this first rung, this is individual factors of well-being. So individual factors is your internal experience, your perception, how you make meaning out of your life circumstances. And we all know in hardship, you can have the worst possible karma and you can still make a meaning out of your life circumstance. So that's an individual factor that includes age, gender, race, and genetics. These are things that we can't really change. Only in our perception can we change them. The next rung is individual and community factors. So that includes things like our behaviors, how we exercise, our nutrition, hydration, positive thinking, the culture in which we're born into, environmental conditions, our access, disease vectors, environmental conditions on air, water, soil, work environment, peace and safety. And then there's public services and infrastructure. So that includes education, housing, transportation, criminal justice, wages, benefits, community centers, parks, the basic things that a community needs to thrive and to grow and to produce beautiful children. And then up here, these are the social, economic, and political factors. So this is social cohesion and civic muscle, political participation, equality or inequality and segregation, poverty and discrimination, social justice and equity, and wealth distribution. Further upstream of these social determinants of health, the World Health Organization says that there are a fundamental set of forces and systems that are shaping the social determinants. The World Health Organization calls this force the causes of the causes. The World Health says that there are three causes, the first being politics, and that's governmental and economic power, policy, and systems and developmental agendas. Next is economics. Weak public regulatory efforts, strong private interests, and unfair economic arrangements. These are the words of the World Health Organization. It's pretty good. And then three is society. That's structure, policy, programs, and societal norms. So these forces shape the conditions that manufacture poor health. And what we're seeing right now everywhere are conditions that are manufacturing poor health. So further upstream of these conditions, which I wish we had time to get into, in Buddhism, they would call the causes of the causes, they would call this the causes of suffering. And in yoga, we call these afflictions klesha. There are 5 klesha in yoga, which I don't have notes on. Lori, what are the 5 klesha?
Your classmates.
Classmates! Oh, actually I know the 5 kleshas. I was just going to open it up for the class. So what are the 5 kleshas? There's egoism. There's attachment.
A video? Is a video one?
There's avidya. What's the English for avidya?
Ignorance.
Ignorance of self.
Oh, there's no, I used to know these off the top of my head.
Good thing we're graduating. So attachment, fear, ignorance, egoism, and aversion. Whoa. Oh, okay. So these conditions, these are systemic drivers of broad-based public health inequities and public health epidemics. So the epidemics are playing out in the form of non-communicable diseases. That's lifestyle-generated diseases. These diseases are impacting people of all races, all socioeconomic backgrounds, all class standings. These diseases are impacting everyone everywhere. The World Health Organization estimates that 88% of deaths in the United States are caused by non-communicable lifestyle-generated disease that's getting manufactured from this illness in consciousness, and that ain't right.
That ain't right.
No, it's not. So how do we systemically and systematically reverse these epidemics? The answer is twofold. One is through primordial prevention, and we're going to look at primordial prevention here in a moment. The other, more importantly, is by separating basic public infrastructure from market and economy. Basic public infrastructure meaning housing, education, child daycare, right? Can we separate public infrastructure from the market economy? Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Cool. Yes, we can. So, primordial prevention is the first of 4 levels of preventative medicine in Western medicine. Primordial prevention is defined as the prevention of risk factors themselves, and it addresses the social determinants of health. It addresses the human in society. The next layer down, primary prevention, this addresses the human condition as an organism in constant movement toward homeostasis. So both the first and the second layers of prevention require a societal and cultural lens and require a look at the social determinants of health. Next down here, secondary prevention. This acknowledges the presence of risk factors, and it prescribes regular exams and labs and screenings, and they're frequently invasive. I'd like to prevent that. Tertiary prevention. That's why you don't write jokes on your cards.
Every other one's landed though.
Oh, well, all right. Tertiary prevention. So this is disease management post-prognosis. This is to slow or to stop disease progression. Usually by tertiary, you're going down a dark road. So currently and historically, amelioration of both social and biological pathologies or epidemics, because right now any pathology we look at is an epidemic. It's been dominated by a disease-focused approach. So the focus has been on intentional suppression of symptoms at the expense of underlying causes. So not only is that playing out in the medical field, that's playing out inside all of our institutions that are addressing social pathologies. Medicine and social service provision, they're currently and historically incentivized to emphasize speed, high volume, and immediate symptom relief rather than identifying systems failures. Now, with that said, it is essential and absolutely needed to be addressing the immediate crisis, which is what almost all of us in this room are doing. We're boots on the ground addressing the immediate crisis. And simultaneously, gotta begin looking up, which I'm lecturing now, I don't need to do that. You have to look upstream! Everyone already is looking upstream, I get that. So I'm talking to myself. I get so frustrated. When all my service provision is happening at the street level at the expense of underlying causes that I'm still can't reach. But together, we can reach those causes. Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
So, what are the social determinants of health generating in terms of disease for the society? Well, the top 10 causes of morbidity, disability, and mortality, according to Los Angeles Public Health Department, from their last report in 2013, lists these 10 causes of death. So, while the top 10 causes of death, and I'll read them out, it's coronary heart disease, stroke, COPD, lung cancer, Alzheimer's disease, pneumonia, influenza, diabetes, colorectal cancer, liver disease, cirrhosis, and hypertension. So while the top 10 diseases culminate in different target organ pathology, they all share critical etiological pathways and systemic inflammation. So ostensibly unrelated conditions are actually sharing etiological mechanisms of oxidative stress and DNA damage, inflammation, and excessive sympathetic nervous system hyperactivity, or sometimes called HPA dysregulation. So what if conscious modulation of physiological mechanisms could decrease these three and improve disease prognosis and prevent, arrest, and selectively reverse end organ pathology across the board? Well, it can. And the answer is in heart rate variability. So, increasing heart rate variability dismantles the three building blocks of non-communicable disease. So what is heart rate variability? Heart rate is controlled by transmissions from the vagus nerve and the vagus nerve innervates the heart where it releases acetylcholine. This is the body's primary parasympathetic neurotransmitter. And that lengthens the interval in between heartbeats, so providing a calming, smoothing effect. So heart rate variability reflects the oscillation between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. In clinical terms, we'll pass that for now, no clinical terms. So heart rate variability is controlled by vagal nerve tone. So what is the vagus nerve? The vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve. It links the medulla to the colon. It regulates autonomic function and homeostasis throughout immune, endocrine, respiratory, cardiovascular, gastrointestinal, and many more systems and functions throughout the body. The vagus nerve innervates almost all of the primary organ systems. It regulates immunological and emotional response to stress, trauma, and injury. It regulates the HPA axis, mood, pain, heart rate, blood pressure, heart rate variability, and a long list of other things. Vagal nerve regulation increases heart rate variability and improves disease prognosis across the board. And many studies demonstrate that low heart rate variability is predictive of all-cause mortality. Yoga therapy increases vagal nerve tone and increases heart rate variability. So what is a yoga therapy prescription for the pervading health epidemic? Well, we use a Vyuha, a 4-step healing model, and in the interest of time, we're going to go through it so fast. So these are the symptoms in the 4-step healing model. These are the causes in the 4-step healing model. These are the goals, and these are the tools we're going to use to achieve those goals. That was a little fast, okay. That was a bit fast. That was so fast that I missed my transition, but that's okay in the interest of time. We'll pick up somewhere right now. So, what does yoga therapy for systems change mean, and what does it look like? It means that systems are organized around the biological homeostasis of the individuals enlivening the system. Bodily homeostasis requires proper movement, exercise throughout the day, every day. It requires access to proper nutrition, nutrient-dense foods throughout the day, every day. Mind-body hygiene, that means the mind sometimes needs quiet, sometimes it needs focus, and sometimes it needs meditation. This is mind-body hygiene. It means cultivation of wisdom and insight. It means a foundation of ethical precepts, and in yoga we call that yama and niyama, and that's relationship with self and observances internally, and relationship with others, what we abstain from. And it also requires taking beneficial postures in everything we're doing. So beneficial posture isn't only asana during a yoga class where you're doing something difficult. It means in our daily life, how we're moving our body while we're at work and while we're at home. And are we being supported by our infrastructure and by our systems, whether organizationally or institutionally or governmentally, are we being supported for internal and physiological homeostasis? So primordial prevention means that everything we do is organized around physiological homeostasis, including the way that we build and operate public infrastructure and social systems. Utilizing heart rate variability as a systems change biomarker, we may begin to correct the course of the current extinction threat posed by the systems as they stand now. Systems have been inhibiting bodily homeostasis of the public servants that are enlivening the systems. Also, all those whom are receiving services from the systems. That ain't right.
That ain't right.
Can we organize our systems around the physiological homeostasis of the people? Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yoga therapy for system change accounts for the well-being of everybody enlivening our local government and social service organizations, and we must foster the ongoing development of providers' personal capacity for self-care and spiritual practice. Spirituality here is defined as the individual internal experience of connectedness, purpose, capacity for internal transformation and evolution, and peace of mind. Lastly, community-based solutions for public peace and public safety. We are talking about the demilitarization of our local police force, but we won't talk about that right now. Up to this point, fiduciary responsibility has been aligned with corporate interest rather than with people, annihilating basic access to needs for hundreds of millions of humans. Public infrastructure needs to be organized around physiological homeostasis. We can create public infrastructure to be non-dependent on market economy. Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Prison, education, healthcare, housing, these things should not be for profit. It's inhumane and it's immoral, and that ain't right.
That ain't right.
Public infrastructure, non-dependent on market or economy, looks like people-centered governance. That's horizontal co-governance. Public housing guarantee. Universal health care. 100% clean energy for all, and the end of environmental racism, the end of frontline communities. Guaranteed decent labor, the end of mass incarceration, a shift to transformative justice and community-based solutions for public peace and public safety. Free college for all, the end of factory farming and industrial agriculture, the end of the military-industrial complex. If you ever hear drop the mic, MIC, that's military-industrial complex, drop the mic. Dignity for immigrants and refugees, the end of the overdose crisis, and protection of native sovereignty. We can do it.
We can do it.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
So I want to end with one more meditation. And take a breath. So wherever you are, just be comfortable, and you can take that same posture we took in the beginning. You can have your eyes open or closed. You can pick a focal point inside or on the ground in front of you. Become aware that you're breathing. Now, I want you to imagine, oh, no one has to do this. You can completely tune me out, by the way. This is 100% non-mandatory. But you're invited to imagine yourself. You're invited to imagine the way that you make money to support yourself. Now imagine what that place would look like if it were organized around your internal requirements for physiological homeostasis. What would that look like for your sleep? What would that look like for your nutrient-dense food intake? What would that look like for your hydration? What would that look like for your peace of mind? What would it look like for your need for physical movement on a regular basis? Your need to sweat and move your body? And what would that look like for your relationship with others around you? And most importantly, what would that look like for yourself, for your relationship with you internally? And you're invited to let your eyes open. And my invitation to everyone here is that we go out into the world and we make that dream manifest for every person in the room. Let's all bring our hands together and generate heat. Once your hands are hot, you have a few options. You can either place them in front of your heart here, you could let them hang out by your side, you can have them up in the air, you can do whatever you want with your hands. I'm going to have mine right here. So we're going to take 3 deep breaths and we're going to vibrate a mantra as we close out. Normally in yoga, we use the mantra Om, but for our purposes today, let's use the mantra Home. So we're going to vibrate the first home for yourself, for your own individual well-being. Let's vibrate the second home out to someone that you know specifically needs help right now. And the third home will vibrate for the entire campus here at LMU, the surrounding community, the county, the city of Los Angeles, the nation, and every place on this globe and the multiverse and beyond. So let's inhale to home.